See this lemon? This lemon is very important. Don't forget about it. Alright, so we're finally back home, and this video is going to be about focusing, but I wanted to talk about, since this massive storm just came through, I wanted to talk about the devastation that this storm actually caused. By the way, safety first, do not cross the caution signs. So, yeah, the damage was really bad. There's a lot of fallen trees, there was a lot of flooding earlier. That's pretty much all receded since we've been back. If this looks a little different, I'm actually using the old kit lens for the Eos M system, which is the 18-55. And I'm beginning to really like this lens, but we're not here to talk about lenses. Let's talk about focus. Alright, now first of all, I would have to say that almost 90% of the time I am using the single point autofocus just because I feel like that is the absolute most responsive version of the autofocus. Sometimes I do use face detect, but face detect can have some problems. For example, 2 videos ago when I was talking about how skateboards are a really good tool for vlogging, I had several scenes that I had to reshoot, and one that I didn't realize that I had to reshoot until I was back at the editing, and so I didn't. Well, because I was wearing glasses, the face detect didn't realize that my face was a face. Now, it did it several times correctly, but that time it did not, and I was very unhappy about that. And that's the main reason that I use center point autofocus, because whatever you put in front of the lens is going to be what's in focus. But center point autofocus is not perfect. So I just realized that all that dark gray behind me is actually rain clouds, and they are moving straight towards me. So I need to go ahead and finish up, and we'll pick this up a little bit later. Skateboards are so fun. So if you're wondering about the lemon from the beginning, let me explain. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That, of course, is a colloquial metaphor because I was not able to do that video on Monday. I wasn't able to complete it. I was feeling a little bit down on it because I wasn't talking very clearly. I wasn't getting my B-roll fast. So that was Monday, and then on Tuesday, Cody Scott contacted me and said, dude, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, what do you have in mind? And he said, well, maybe a YouTube video. So I figured, why don't we go ahead and do a collab? And since he has a 60 Mark II, I figured we could kind of broaden this and do not just the M50 focus mode, but pretty much all dual pixel cameras. So as I was saying about the problems with single point autofocus, the biggest one for me is that when I'm backlighting like I am now, where the sky is blown out but my face is evenly exposed, if I'm not in the shot, it goes out of focus and it can't really find something to focus on because it doesn't have any detail for the face detection autofocus points to work. So in this sort of a scenario, if I wanted to have myself in focus all the time, I'd probably use face detect. But the problem with face detect is that sometimes it doesn't pick up my face out right away because it's not in focus. And so it's sort of a toss-up. I go back and forth on this one. I use face detect about half the time and single point about half the time, and I'm not sure which one is really better in this scenario. But in general, again, I probably would just use single point autofocus because once I actually get in the scene, it's gonna go right to my face. Now Cody, he's not actually into the single point autofocus that much, so I'm gonna let Cody tell you what focus setting he uses. So what autofocus setting do you normally use?
So the thing about videography is that there's so many different styles that you can be shooting at. So when it comes to vlogging, I would probably recommend face tracking because you don't really necessarily have to worry about your camera always being in focus. However, I'm a professional videographer and I own a production company, so I would use single point autofocus if I'm doing high intensity videos. When I'm shooting B-roll, 100% of the time, I'm using smooth zone. And what that does is it allows your camera to decide which is better to do. So should it focus on the entire thing or just one subject? So smooth zone is definitely my personal favorite.
See, that's interesting because I've been saying in this video that I almost exclusively use, for vlogging, single point autofocus. Yeah, I don't have to let the camera decide what is in focus. I decide what's in focus because whatever I point it at is in focus.
I think it's very important too to have single point autofocus. The only reason I don't like it is because if you step out of that small square that's on your screen right now, then it goes out of focus. And to me, there's so much variable change that you can't really predict. So I like to use smooth zone.
Now, Cody did actually make a good point. One of the advantages of the face tracking autofocus is that you can touch on something in the frame and your camera will track that all throughout the frame. As long as it's within the AF area, your camera will track that and keep focus on your subject. So that is an advantage of not using single point autofocus. Alright, and now it's time for the part of the video where I tell you I am running out of light very rapidly, and so let's pick this up back in the studio. Wait, hold on. Before we get back to the studio, there's something very important that I actually need to do. I can't believe I almost did this again. See, me and Cody did a collaboration just like a month ago, and I forgot to even introduce him. And when I got back to the editing room, I was like, oh no, that was an accent. So I want to introduce you to who is Cody Scott.
My name is Cody Scott. I have a channel that teaches you how to explore, inspire, and engage as an active videographer. Job and I met in an interesting way. So he came into the fresh market that I work at currently, and I seen him placing a camera up inside the meat section, and of course that sparked my interest. So ultimately what I do, I asked him, is it for YouTube? He said yes. So Job brought me along on a vlog a few weeks ago, and from there, holy cow, I started learning so much about how vlogging relates to filmmaking, what you can learn from vlogging and apply that to your filmmaking as well. It teaches me things that I can specifically apply to my videography career. I immediately got into vlogging after that, so yeah.
Now, one really interesting thing that Cody didn't mention is that when him and his wife met me and my wife for coffee, we actually found out that my second cousin, twice removed, was actually her great-grandfather. Who knew? Alright, and now let's actually get back to the studio so we can finish talking about the focus issue. We only have a couple more points to make. So I know that was quite a bit all over the place. It wasn't as concise as I would normally like to do it in a video, so I thought we'd talk about each of the focus settings, the pros, the cons, and when I think that they should be used. First of all, we have the face and subject tracking. Now right now I'm actually using the face tracking. I walked into the room, I knew my face was going to be registered the entire time. I wanted to have it focused on my face the entire time. This is really the scenario where face detection works. If you're doing a walking and talking interview where your person's moving all over your frame, that's when you want to use face detection. You can also tap on the face and select it. That way it always focuses on their face, not any of the other faces that come into the scene. And in my opinion, face detection is pretty much the perfect focus mode for a sit-down talking segment like this, or a walking around interview where you always want to constantly have focus on your subject's face. Now for dual pixel cameras like the M50, that tracking area doesn't just work for faces. You can actually track any subject by simply touching on it. And like I said earlier, as long as your subject stays within that AF area, you're going to maintain focus on your subject. Now the cons of face tracking, like I was mentioning earlier, is that if it doesn't pick up your face right, it of course can't get the focus right. Now the next focus setting is Zone AF, and it actually makes a box of several of your focus points that you can kind of touch around the screen, and it gives you a wider AF area so that the cameras can sort of measure in that area and decide what should be in focus and what shouldn't. And as Cody was saying, he uses this for most of his B-roll. That way, if he moves a little bit off of his subject, it doesn't go out of focus. Now the problem with that for me is that I don't want my camera deciding what's in focus. I want to decide what's in focus. I want, if I'm pointing the camera at myself and I just off-center it a little bit, I want it to be able to focus on the background so that I can show what I want. But if one of those focus points stay on your face, then it'll probably continue to focus on yourself instead of focusing where you want it. And so it just sort of makes it a wider AF area that you have to take off of yourself, off of your normal framing, and that brings us to my favorite AF setting, which is one-point autofocus. Basically what that is just one single point that you can put anywhere in your AF area, and whatever is in that little box, that is what your camera is going to focus on. And the reason I like this is the reason that I didn't like the Zone AF, is because I want to decide what's in focus. I don't want my camera to decide what's in focus. And so I want anything that I point that little box on to be in focus. I do not want the camera making that decision for me. The reason I use autofocus instead of manual focus is not because autofocus is better. It's just because it's faster. If I could do everything just as quickly with manual focus, I wouldn't need autofocus so much. And so having extensively used all of the AF settings, face detect, zone, and single point, I have to say that 90% of the time, unless I'm sitting here in the studio, I'm using single point autofocus just because I find it the easiest to always have focus on my subject. Now, if you like a different focus setting, let me know down in the comments section. I'm actually really interested to hear what other M50 and dual pixel camera shooters are actually using, or really any shooters. If you're using a Panasonic, Sony, what focus settings do you use? Let me know down in the comments section, as well as any other questions that you have about focusing on dual pixel camera. If this video was helpful for you, why don't you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video.